The world is in crisis. And not just because of the last few months, not just because of COVID-19, but because of the last few decades. We need a new way of thinking on climate, on inequality, on health. Because the way we're doing things just isn't working well enough. And why? Because there are few consequences for countries that ignore international rules, for regimes that think might makes right. Few consequences for places where opposition figures are being poisoned while cyber tools and disinformation are being used to destabilize democracies. Few consequences when innocent citizens are arbitrarily detained and fundamental freedoms are repressed, when women's rights are not treated as human rights, when no one has any rights at all. The system is broken, and things are about to get much worse unless we change. Right now, we have a chance, not a big chance, but a chance to shift course, to realize that the only way through this is together. Putting some people ahead of others does not work. A healthier, cleaner, more equal future cannot be the privilege of a lucky few. It must be the right of us all. Instead of crossing our fingers and hoping that the big powers will figure this out, let's look at what we can do to make a difference together. Let's use our shared power, not just to get a vaccine, but to get it out to everyone. Let us be inspired by our citizens' call to restore the global economy while we tackle climate change. In other words, let's not wait for someone else to act. Let's do it ourselves. Each one of us here in these United Nations, each one of us uniting around a shared future. Canada has a long history in peacekeeping, and we will continue to step up and continue to move the dial on lasting peace by empowering women. Canada has always supported the work of agencies like UNICEF, the World Food Programme, and the UNHCR. We must understand our opportunities and our responsibilities to take real action together, to protect each other, to support each other. If we meet this moment, if we rise to this challenge, I know that, like our grandparents did 70 years ago, we will lay the foundations of a better world.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for being here. My name is Lara Seligman, and I'm the Pentagon reporter for Politico. This is my first time moderating a panel at Halifax, so I'm honored to be able to join you, even if it's virtually. I'm very much looking forward to our discussion entitled Go Canada, Middle Powers Show the Way. I'd like to first introduce our distinguished panelists, Harjit Sajjan, Minister of National Defence of Canada, and we also have Artis Pabriks, Defense Minister of Latvia, and we also have Rachel Kleinfeld, who is at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Excuse me. Minister Sajjan is a former detective with the Vancouver Police Department and Lieutenant Colonel in the Canadian Army. He's served as the Minister of National Defence since 2015. Welcome, Minister Sajjan.
Great, thank you for having me.
Minister Pabriks, Defense Minister of Latvia. Minister Pabriks is a distinguished politician who served as Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2004 to 2007, Minister of Defense from 2010 to 2014, and he was also a member of the European Parliament from 2014 to 2018. He's been Minister of Defense since 2019. And finally, we have Rachel Kleinfeld, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I'd like to just kick us off with some thoughts about this topic as we move through some uncertain times. I'm not just talking about the coronavirus pandemic. It's no secret that President Donald Trump has, to put it lightly, shaken things up in the foreign policy world over the last 4 years. He's pulled out of international agreements, he's threatened to leave NATO, and he's reduced the US military footprint all around the world. I'm hoping in our discussion today that that we can talk about the upcoming change in U.S. administration and what that means for middle power democracies and whether it changes how you engage on the world stage. So Minister Sajjan, over to you for your comments.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you very much for, again, for having me on this panel, and hello to my fellow panelists as well. I think it's a great discussion in terms of the importance of middle powers and what can be accomplished. I think it's very important not just to wait for others to take the lead. There's so many security challenges that we face today that we need to start having creative conversations. Look at the uniqueness that each of our nations has to offer. One of the things I'm very proud of in Canada is we literally have representation of the entire world inside Canada. So we have a different perspective, and that allows us to be able to convene conversations, discussions, and have those difficult discussions and be able to move things forward in challenging times. So that's something that we look forward to doing.
Thanks so much. Minister Pabriks?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me second time to Halifax Forum with even such possibility to contribute. And I think it's very important that in this panel we really discuss the chances and possibilities for the middle powers to do something in order to improve our lives on our common globe. Because once you look traditionally to political analysis, to political science, or any analyst in politics, they usually concentrate their attention on large powers, because the large powers are traditionally the ones which decide the fates of the people. But in fact, there is no anymore such large powers in the world which have an absolute power. And in fact, there is no absolute power in the world at all. So that simply means we have to look into the depths. How much power do other countries have? And I would allow myself to finish maybe this small introduction just telling how I see the definition of a middle powers, which is a title of this conversation. I would say that middle power is a small power's ambition. So in fact, we have to discuss things about our ambitions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Kleinfeld, over to you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, it's lovely to be here virtually, although I wish I was there. I think the last time I was at Halifax, I was with Minister Sajjan at one of our informal dinners. But even not being in Canada, one is in America, one feels the influence of the middle powers right now. And part of that is that although US leadership on the globe was often inconsistent, sometimes ineffective, not always welcome, it had been a cornerstone, both militarily and democratically. And right now that's been shaken for the last 4 years, but will be shaken for some time in the future. Even with the new administration, there's going to be a very significant loss of soft power that's going to continue due to the poor handling of the COVID crisis over the last few years. Our ability to project diplomatic power is going to be problematic because our civil service has been so hollowed out over the last few years. Our last transition that was slowed, the way this transition has been slowed, at the 100-day mark, George W. Bush only had 35 Senate-confirmed appointments out of 1,200. That's possibly about where we'll be here. He at least had a Senate that wanted to confirm. It's not clear that we'll be in the same place. So we need middle powers to step up. As the video is showing, there are a great number of challenges that not only can middle powers tackle, but middle powers might be better at tackling. We can get into those later, but issues like corruption, climate change, and so on, technology regulation are areas where middle powers have already taken a significant lead.
Thank you all so much for your comments. So Robin Shepherd has had the opportunity to speak to others on this topic. Let's have a look.
I would say that the most significant challenge for a country like Canada, which depending on how you look at it is a small middle power or a big small power, but there are many countries like us. How are we going to contribute to the global order? And how are we going to defend our interest in the global order? And no country as blessed as Canada and as I think we frequently have punched above our weight. But that notwithstanding, no country that fits our description or is even in that category of countries can find its way in this world alone. Cannot be done. We need each other, and the United Kingdom needs Canada, and Canada needs the United Kingdom, and that is true of the Netherlands, that is true of countries all around the world in all continents, Asia, Africa, South America, not just Europe. And we've got to be working together, sometimes on projects, sometimes on standing up and making a point about things. We've done that recently in relation to our difficulties with a couple of our citizens who are detained in China. We've all recognized a number of like-minded countries, what is at stake, and we have spoken together, and we've done that in relation to other issues. Whether it's cooperation in very practical matters or big existential challenges like climate change, we cannot find our way alone. And the democratically minded countries are going to have to work at renewing the projects that unite us, as well as the institutions that have served us well. That's what Halifax is all about. That's what we can bring to Halifax as participants. That's what we can take away from Halifax every time we've gathered.
So we're supposed to have General Angus Campbell, the Australian Chief of Defence Staff, join us as well, but he's having some technical difficulties, and we'll work to get him on. So for now, I'll just kick off the Q&A portion of our discussion. So the world has been watching the results of the US presidential election very closely. So my question for each of you is, what changes are you hoping to see from a Biden administration? And what, if anything, would you like to see continued from the Trump administration? Minister Sajjan, would you like to kick us off?
Well, first of all, this is the second time I've been at the Halifax Security Forum where we've had a change in U.S. administration, and I've always said this: that we not only look forward to working with the new administration, and any new administration brings opportunities and also challenging conversations. But that's what good neighbors and good partners do. I think we have a lot of pressing challenges in front of us. The first one is obviously the pandemic and how we can come together and deal with this collectively, because no nation can be safe unless the entire world is safe. And the other aspects that we're seeing is climate change. We need to take a very strong stance on climate change and get a grip of something that generations can look back at us and saying that we actually did make a difference. From a security perspective, there's a lot of work to do, unfortunately. Over the years, certain nations have pushed the boundaries on kind of taking a jab at international rules-based order, and then which has created unpredictability, and that unpredictability can lead to miscalculation. And this is something that I think we need to work with the U.S., but also, as we're talking about, with middle powers from around the world, how we can convene, come together, and bring back that predictability is going to be very important. So these are some of the things that we look forward to working with the U.S.
Yes, certainly. And Minister Pabriks, would you like to weigh in?
Well, of course, we have been watching American political show already for quite a long time. But if you ask me to answer in a nutshell, what do we expect? Well, first of all, I would expect, and we here would expect, that the United States is keeping up their own ambition to remain a great power. Secondly, I would say that if they want to remain a great power, they have to listen to their friends, and they have to work together with their friends, which includes countries which are at large, all smaller, of course, than the United States, but they are allies. Thirdly, I think what we very much expect from the current United States is to reconstruct and to be a leader, start to lead the reconstruction of international organizations, international trade, international security networks, all the rest, because we can see that in the last decade or in the last 5 years, international organizations have been increasingly losing its power. And if international organizations are losing their power, then simply might starts to take the right, because then the nation states with larger capabilities, military capabilities, political capabilities, are not anymore listening to the arguments and not looking what is right and wrong. They simply can press others to do something because international order doesn't work. We have to return to the international order where we are dealing with each other according to agreed rules. And this is one of the largest problems at this moment.
Thank you. And I think we have an update. I think we have General Campbell on the phone. General Campbell, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, there you are. Yes.
Finally, we do.
Glad to have you with us. Would you like to make any opening comments?
Could I just say that to reflect on the minister's comments there, I'm very optimistic about both the future of American power in the world and also of the wide variety of opportunities for middle powers to create space, to innovate, and to generate new forms of engagement at many levels that generate the kind of influence to promote a rules-based international order, to cohere around a great power with an enlightened approach to that order, and also to encourage others to join in that effort. But it has to be a deliberate, intentional effort on the part of powers, as opposed to looking at the world from an individualistic perspective, and we're all weakened by that. So I'll just kind of leave it there, having come in late to the conversation.
Thank you. We're glad to have you. And Dr. Kleinfeld, would you like to weigh in on this question of the U.S. presidential election?
Sure. Well, I think given the familiar faces that everyone is going to see back in positions, there will be a desire on the part of many to assume that we're back 4 years ago where we were before. And I think that while America will certainly want to retake its mantle as a strong global leader, it is going to not play the same role that it played before. It will be working to lead on democracy, to lead on a global economic restart, to lead militarily again. But there will also be a real pull to solve the problems at home. We have immense problems of racial disparities, of unrest, of a polarized Congress and polarized politics that are likely to make it very hard to do some of the things that this administration would like to do. And so I think it would behoove middle powers, especially during the first year while everybody is still staffing up, to really be thinking of initiatives they can bring to a U.S. that is willing and wanting to lead, but perhaps not fully able at that point to lead. And these can be everything from military initiatives. The U.S. clearly is trying to gear up for great power wars again. And we are still in the midst of a lot of small, irregular wars. These are areas where middle powers and the peacekeeping abilities they've shown play a huge role, will be playing a huge role, can continue to do a lot. And then on a number of multilateral fronts, the U.S. again will be speaking up and speaking out. But in some places, middle powers will have more credibility and more ability to organize other countries, particularly right now, from the UK, which led the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative and did immense good on anti-corruption, to the Inclusive Vaccines Alliance that France spearheaded, the Alliance for Multilateralism. There's a huge number of these sorts of loose convenings of middle powers that can bring the US in but can lead before the US begins. And I think that's where we need to be thinking of for the future.
Thank you. I'd like to talk now a little bit about China. What sort of new or refreshed alliance structures does the international community need in order to meet this rise of China? And related to that question, how are the middle power democracies dealing with this rising superpower rivalry between the US and China? Are you feeling pressure to choose between one or the other? Minister Sajjan, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. This is a very important topic, and as we talk about the unpredictability that some nations have created because they don't want to follow the norms of international rules-based order, this is something I think nations like China have to realize that the rest of the world are watching very closely, and when they find that citizens of nations can be arbitrarily arrested. It's not a bilateral issue. It is an issue for the world, because what if another nation, I believe that Australia had to deal with the same issue. These are some of the things that bring middle powers together. And if you look at our history, anytime there is a challenge, nations come together for the common good and to make a difference. And this pandemic is a great example that was just outlined earlier. So I think when it comes to, do we need new organizations? Right now, I think no. We have a lot of multilateral forums that we can actually discuss some of the challenges that China is posing to the world. Whether it's from a Five Eyes perspective, we have, for example, the G20 that's taking place right now. But we can also have nations that convene together. And the perfect example of this is where, with the threat from North Korea that all of our nations were facing, especially here in North America, where, from a diplomatic sense, where in Canada we convened all the foreign ministers who participated in the conflict during the Korean War, where Secretary Mattis and I were able to deliver our kind of military perspective on what we can do militarily to set the diplomatic conversation. And from this, the action of Operation Neon from a Canadian perspective was created, where nations came together for sanctions monitoring against North Korea. And I've said this many times, what that allows is for our diplomats to be able to do their work, because ultimately it's that diplomacy that is absolutely essential to creating that success. No one wants a military option, because there are no winners in that. And this goes to show that as we talk about middle powers and the work that can be done as we convene, every middle power needs to also demonstrate it in action. And that's something that Australia, ourselves, Latvia, something we're good at is we also step up to take the appropriate action to provide that credibility, to convene and have that appropriate dialogue. And so that action is very important to the work that we're doing. And that action that's going to be taking place as we look at the challenge that China is posing, never underestimate when nations come together. History has demonstrated this.
Very good point. Minister Pabriks?
Yeah, thank you. I will try to follow up on what Harjit has been speaking about. You see, one of my good friends, the former foreign minister of Iceland, which is obviously still a rising middle power, was the one, or the country was the one, which recognized our independence around 30 years ago from Soviet Union. And in those days, and later on, once he was reflecting on this recognition as a first country, he was telling, look, large powers, they have geopolitical responsibility. What will happen if, for instance, Soviet Union dissolves? What will happen if something else some other accident is taking place? But the small powers have the moral responsibility. So we, as the smaller powers, because middle power or small power, this is always a question of definition, but they are more or less in the same bench of group. They always have this moral responsibility. And if we are looking to the rise of China, as you defined it, you see, there is nothing wrong if country is rising. There is nothing wrong if country is becoming stronger geopolitically or internationally or at home economically. But the problem is that a large majority of the world countries, and particularly we here in the West, we cannot accept that example what this large power is showing us regarding the future development. Because large powers usually earn the respect, not only by power, but by their example. And if I look from the Latvian perspective, look, we have been under the left-wing communist dictatorship of foreign power, at those days Soviet Union, which occupied us and invaded us. So here it's extremely difficult to accept any kind of example which is coming from, in our understanding, similar ideological country. At the same time, what can we do? Well, first, I am in this panel the only one which represents Europe or European Union. And if you are looking from outside to European Union is a group, in fact, of small and middle powers which united together, and our economic might and also our possible political and soft political might is actually very, very large in the global world. So if we can create a system, European Union plus our transatlantic allies, then of course we can also counter the negative impact of anything which is for us morally not acceptable. But in the short term, I think here Australians are a little bit closer geographically. I think in the short term, the litmus test of the rising non-democratic, as I would call it, Chinese power will be its attitude towards its neighboring countries, which is South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, Vietnam, and we have to be ready to assist these small and middle-sized countries also to be capable to survive according to their values and their standards. And in this case, also comes into my mind the thing on which we base our policies, defense policies and security policies in Latvia, because I will not use at the beginning a Latvian example, but one of my friends in Okinawa, which is very close to China, which is prefecture in Japan, was telling about old Okinawan wisdoms. And their wisdom is not to win always. We don't need to win, but we need to survive. And the small and medium-sized powers are always more keen to put their forces together because they are always challenged much more than the big ones. And rise of China, according to their standards, is really a challenge for the Western world.
Certainly, certainly. General Campbell, would you like to weigh in?
Sure. Thanks very much. I think that there are a lot of bilateral, unilateral, and multilateral fora that we operate within across the Indo-Pacific region in economic, financial, military, and diplomatic spaces. And those fora need the energy, the commitment, and the desire to give them practical life and effect to strengthen the community rather than to simply be a forum that you attend but without purpose or without a functional result emerging. So to me, it's not about necessarily new things, but the quality, the strength of the commitment to things that exist and evolve them as they go. And in doing so, seek where you can to involve all the nations in areas where the common interest exists. And I mean all nations, including China and other nations, where there's a common interest, where you can find common ground. And in doing so, this question of choosing is something that I think, to the fullest extent possible, we should avoid causing smaller countries and middle-sized countries, geographically proximate countries, from feeling that they don't have a choice. They ought to always have a choice. And one of the goals of our efforts in the world should be if you want a rules-based international order and you want free and open Indo-Pacific, which is certainly Australia's perspective, that's a place in which all the countries have opportunity and choice, and they don't feel that they have to adopt one or other binary choices, binary positions. You're going to be creating a better future if you can maneuver the community in that direction. It's not going to be easy, but I think it's the worthy objective to achieve. And it's one in which there's enough space for all to be more confident of stability, security, and through those, enabling prosperity.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. Dr. Kleinfeld, would you like to talk about China?
Sure. You know, the rise of any new great power is always the challenge of its era. And China is a particularly fascinating and difficult challenge. They've lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. They've got a middle class now that's feeding universities in Australia and Canada and America and the UK, all around the world. They deserve a global chance. Those people deserve a global chance. China and the United States are the most likely candidates for pulling global economies out of the pandemic doldrums that we're likely to find ourselves in and getting the global economy restarted again. We need to work together on that, or at least not apart. And then at the same time, they've imprisoned at least 1 million, quite probably many more Uyghurs. They've waged terror against the children of those people. The level of surveillance and the surveillance state is growing and growing. And we can't ignore that while we work on all of the positives. And that means that we need to have some frank and nuanced and hard conversations about how to make this work with this rising power that does not push middle powers into a you're with us or you're against us stand, because that just won't work. China is putting countries, particularly middle powers, in really unenviable positions. When Canada stood up and stuck its neck out to really try to help America, frankly, using strong diplomacy against China, they had their citizens arrested in China, and very few other countries stood up and said anything. We can't have that continue. We need to find ways to help one another on the moral issues, as we were just hearing from the Minister of Defense, assist the economic issues, and yet mitigate some of the military issues that we have seen both in Hong Kong as perhaps a signal or a shot across the bow, and in Taiwan, where the United States, of course, has a treaty obligation and does not want to see a military threat. So I think we have, as others have said, many existing fora. We also have some new fora like the Quad, which form really interesting ways to start addressing this set of issues. The Interparliamentary Alliance on China forms an interesting way for legislators in democracies to start addressing these issues. And I think we need to address them from many dimensions: moral, economic, military, and so on, in a very complex way. And it's one of the real sadnesses of not having Halifax this year in person, because those side conversations would have been particularly useful this year, but we will find a way.
Well, thank you. I'd like to get one more question in before turning to Q&A about the coronavirus pandemic. As you know, cases are rising worldwide. Can you talk about how middle power democracies can help with the global response to COVID-19? And in particular, since I have you here, what role does the military and the defense community play in the distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine? Minister Sajjan?
When it comes to the pandemic, I think it's a responsibility of all nations to come together. We all have a responsibility to our citizens. But as our health minister, Patty Heidi, always says, we cannot be safe unless the whole world is safe. And this is something that's extremely important for everybody to understand around the world. So as we look at our supply chains, we need to look at how we look after our citizens, but then how do we look at supporting one another. We have already started some initiatives on this. Our Prime Minister is already committed to that. When it comes to the vaccine, not only will be looking after Canada, but we will be participating in supporting the vaccine rollout for the rest of the world. We have secured obviously a large number of vaccine, probably beyond more than what we possibly may need, but with that allows us to be able to help. And the military have been playing a very important role in this, and I think this has been a really good example for all our nations, and especially ministers of defense, chiefs of defense staff, to take a look at. We've all talked about health pandemics and what are the impacts of that. But when we put our defense policies together, but the question comes up, what's the likelihood of it happening? And it was, well, the likelihood is low. Well, that's no longer. So the military has been playing a very important role in how we have structured things, how we made investments into certain capabilities. Had allowed us to be extremely supportive. And this is one thing I'm really proud of, is that while this was happening, you saw the pandemic wave kind of go around the world. We were able to get a hold of one another and say, okay, what is happening in your country? How is your military supporting? And in our case here, it really helped me to look at what we needed to do with the Canadian Armed Forces. And we were able to, the military was able to put together a very good plan to be supportive. And now our planners are already working together to looking at the role that the military will play. So this is not just for us from a Canadian perspective. It won't be just strictly a military or federal government. This is going to take a whole out country effort. But when you put all this together, this is going to take the whole world to come together to making sure that everybody is safe, so that our economies can get back to normal, so that we can start interacting one another. I know how so many people miss probably traveling, and I miss talking to many of the people in person. But the military is going to be playing a very important role. We'll have more to say here in Canada as the planning progresses, but I'm confident this will be the same thing around the world.
Right, yeah, this is an interesting question, particularly as the U.S. starts ramping up its Operation Warp Speed to distribute the vaccine. I'm told we have less than 10 minutes left, so just quickly, if the three of you could answer this question as well. General Campbell, would you like to weigh in?
Oh, sure. Look, the logistic capacity of militaries is incredibly valuable here in the Indo-Pacific, and particularly in the Southwest Pacific. And so I think that we will be seeing work across the community of nations in this space. Also, I expect our ASEAN partners will utilise the logistic mobility, the capacity, the scale of militaries to assist, driven and directed by health and other state departments. But there's a big role, and it's important, if you are going to secure your own country's health and well-being, to be looking beyond it to the circumstances of others around you. And if that is an attitude taken by countries across the globe, then we'll get on top of this thing. Thank you.
Minister Pabriks?
Well, as one of the greatest world thinkers about war issues and Chinese origin, Sun Tzu was telling, who wishes to fight must also count the cost. And I think what differs military from all other job perspectives is that military cannot afford to live with a wishful thinking in the world of illusions. And COVID-19 actually was immediately showing those weaknesses, what we do have in the international order. And first of all, we can speak about logistics, because we had open borders even in European Union. We had a common market, but then suddenly when the crisis of this virus was striking at us, suddenly countries were not so eager, first of all, to share the resources. And secondly, they did not have those resources, because we even could not produce enough of face masks and other equipment needed. Secondly, I think we in the military or in the defense sector, we immediately started to learn the other weaknesses, because look, COVID-19 didn't abolish other diseases, and it also, as a challenge, didn't abolish other challenges. And from that regard, military and armies and defense sector has always a double necessity. First of all, be capable to assist their societies to counter this crisis, but also to remain capable to counter any other threats to our security, independence, or defense issues. What we have been doing in Latvia, most of all, up to now, till today, is mainly regarding providing logistics, purchasing, procuring all the personal security equipment against the COVID-19, and also distributing this. But of course, we have been also assisting in order to secure our outside border, EU and NATO outside border, because our border guards are stretched, and we are ready to do many other things. But we also must understand, and we need to learn from this crisis, which we didn't expect, is that we have a number of weaknesses as a country. And again, the only way forward is cooperation.
Certainly. Dr. Kleinfeld, would you like to have the last word on this issue?
Sure, and I'll keep it short because we want to get to questions, I realize. I think there's been a handing of the baton at different phases of this challenge between governments and their societies. So at first, the governments that were able to get a very tight handle on who had COVID, do contact tracing, manage the surveillance, and keep a ring around the problem, were able to get ahead of it. Countries like Taiwan and other mostly middle powers did very well. But once the disease escaped that cordon, you needed your society to do the right thing. You needed your society to wear masks. You needed your society to keep social distance. And countries that did not have social trust and social cohesion really started to fall behind. What we're seeing now as the vaccine starts to get rolled out is a return to governmental, but now international governmental needs. We need to work together to get this vaccine out. Things like the Inclusive Vaccines Alliance have been instrumental in how do we make this an equitable rollout for the globe. Certain countries have procured very small percentages of the vaccine. I'm not going to name names in this Halifax forum, but if a government has 5% of its population covered by the vaccine, which 5% are going to get that vaccine? And what social unrest are we going to see from the other 95% who aren't covered? I doubt that 5% is always going to go to those who believe themselves to be the most worthy. And so we're going to see security challenges coming out of this. I think we're going to have to muddle through and do the best we can. And I hope the other governments that are willing to be more inclusive and equitable are trying to speed the getting out of the vaccine to the countries that don't have the best interests of their citizens at heart, but would take more vaccine if they could get it. But I think that's the position we're going to be in right now. And then we need to look to the future, because in the future, contagious diseases we know are more likely. We're going to continue to see pandemics as zoonotic diseases, people and animals coming together, and as climate change renders this more likely. And we have to come up with a better answer than simply always relying on our militaries for logistics. Our militaries do a wonderful job at logistics. They know how to do it. But do we want them to be the front lines, or do we want public health agencies and other agencies to strengthen our states and be the front lines in the future? And I think that's the question we need to ask next.
Yeah, very interesting points. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time, so I'm going to have to wrap this up here. But thank you so much for your comments, Minister Sajjan, General Campbell, Dr. Kleinfeld, Minister Pabriks. I've really enjoyed our discussion. And thank you to the audience also for joining us. And please be sure to come back at 3 p.m. for our final panel of the day, Space Contested.